Hello, International Grandmaster Ron W. Henley, and welcome again to our 10th round coverage of the World Chess Olympiad, brought to you by OnlineChessLessons.net. So the US, after a fantastic win yesterday against the Russian Federation, had moved into first place, and they on board 1 was playing China. The games on board 1, 2, and 4 all ended in draws, and so that left the critical moment to happen not just in this match, but probably in the U.S. chance for gold medal occurred on board 3. GM Liren, kind of the breakout star of this Olympiad team, has already had a couple of fantastic attacking games, was playing Grandmaster Alexander Onischuk, who, if we remember, played a very nice rook ending just a few rounds ago, and is the new University of Texas Tech chess coach. So we pick up on move 37. Onischuk is playing black. He's got an ending, 2 pawns against 3. Normally this is a theoretical draw. However, accurate defense is required. Now in this case, black has a couple of very favorable features. His rook is cutting the white king off from advancing. His pawn on h5 is usefully placed, well-known defensive technique, so that it's ready to exchange should a pawn come to g4. Of course, when you're pawn down, you want to be exchanging pawns, not pieces as a rule. And then third, his king is active. So all this means that black actually has ideal formation at this point and very good chances to make a draw. So we skip ahead after a little dilly-dallying back and forth. White makes a little progress, puts his rook on the third, offers to exchange rooks. Of course, Onischuk does not exchange rooks. He drops back to a 4th rank defense. Now after a few more moves, we get to move 44. White again, offering to exchange rooks and trying to inch forward. Onischuk checks, and then we skip to move 50, where again, similar motif. A little change in the pawn formation over here, and again, white offering to exchange rooks. And we'll continue play from here. Onischuk rook a2. This touches the f-pawn, keeps the white king from advancing. White advances f3, rook a5, the 5th rank defense. g4, we can see white is gradually inching forward, and now rook a1. And now white plays g5 in an attempt to make progress, and this is absolutely, as we said, not only the critical moment of this match, but the critical moment for the U.S. team's chance for the gold medal. The correct defense here would be to play f takes g5. After rook d6 check, king f5, rook d5 check, king g6, rook g5, and now this is very important. King f6, rook h5 is now known with the f and h pawns to be a winning endgame. Requires quite a bit of technique. Brown won this endgame a few times in the 1970s against both Lane and Shamkovich in U.S. championships, I believe. Today, it's well known to be a win. So, after rook takes g5, you would have to play king h6. But you have the possibility of either rook a4 or rook h1, tying white to the defense of his pawn on h4. And after rook d5, for example, rook h1, rook check, you simply drop your king back, and this type of position is known to be a draw. According to Fritz, in fact, white is barely a quarter of a pawn ahead here, in fact. Okay? So let's go back. So after g5, f takes g5, rook check, king back. Let's say white takes with the pawn. He does now have his 2 connected pass pawns. However, rook a3 check, king f4, and rook a4 check, and black can set up a 5th rank defense. After king g3, h4 check, king h3, and then rook f4, we can see the white pieces have now lacked coordination. And again, black has sufficient resources to make a draw. For example, king g2, h3 check, king g3, and now, very important moment, you have to strike before white gets coordinated and play h2. Remember this position, and then we'll compare this to what happens later in the game. Here, for example, after rook d1, you can simply take on g5. Or, after king h2, you simply take the pawn on f3, And again, you keep your rook on the third rank. This is a very easy known draw, the white king being cut off from his passed pawn. So after g5, what white is hoping for is to play rook d6, capture on f6, and get two connected passed pawns. Unfortunately, that's pretty much what happens in the game. So instead of the critical f takes g5, Onischuk at this point played rook h1. And unfortunately, we have to give this a double question mark. Because after rook d6, rook takes h4, it seems black's doing okay, but white now plays f4. Everything's totally coordinated. The king protects the f-pawn protects the g-pawn, and the rook pins the f6 pawn, which is double attacked. So now, unfortunately for black, he will lose the f6 pawn by force, and white will have two connected passed pawns. In fact, that's what happens after rook h1. Well, a desperate try would be to activate the king, but this loses pretty thematically to rook takes and simply g6. For example, king h3, rook f5 would be very precise, and on rook g4, rook takes h5, king g3, and rook g5, and that's pretty much the end of that story. So after the excellent f4, which totally coordinated the white forces, Onischuk played rook h1, but then rook f6 check, and here white has simply well-known thematic winning endgame. The point being the two white pawns can advance, creating mate threats, while the black pawn can easily be stopped from behind. After rook h6, rook check, king over, rook over, king over, rook h4, king f3 of course, rook back, king back, and now white gets the right idea, king e4. Black tries to save his pawn, and now king f5. And here white has two possibilities. One is to come back with his king and track down the pawn, as in the game. The other is to go rook check and rook down, and the black king starts to fall under threats of mate. Onischuk tries to save his h-pawn, but after king g4, h2, and king g3, white executes the cleanest win. Note, the black king has been cut off, and white is able to maintain his two connected passed pawns. In fact, Onischuk resigned in this position because after rook check, you take, and on rook g4, simply rook f6 defends the pawns long enough for the white king to come back up and join forces. A very, very sad turn of events for the US, and now they drop back in the medal hunt, and China is now in clear first place. Well, with the unpleasant US experience out of the way, let's look at a couple more highlights from round 10 of the Olympiad. By the way, I might highly recommend that some of our viewers check out I am Andrew Martin's excellent coverage of former FIDE world champion Kazhmedinov's 26-move crusher against Veselin Topalov. Definitely worth checking out. Probably available as well on YouTube. The next game we're going to look at briefly here is Grandmaster Socko Bartos against GM David Navara. This comes from the Poland versus Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic match, and Navara, playing black, is a pawn down. White is just captured on c6. However, note that the white king, not castled yet, bishop not developed, rook in the corner. Black plays queen b8. Bishop e2, rook takes b2, exchanges queens, and now white begins to realize he has problems with his bishop. He plays bishop f3, but note, for example, that king f2, simply rook a8. Rook e1, rook a2, and this is just a classic example of superior mobility here. Believe it or not, white has no way to save this pinned bishop. For example, if king f3, bishop check, and back in the pin. Or, after rook a2, if king f1, simply dice and splice. Rook takes e2, rook takes e2, and the diagonal pin does the job. So in the game, after rook at f to b8, material is equal, but white's lack of development and black's superior mobility simply tells the tale. So in the game, white tried bishop f3. Now, we could win with rook b1 check, but Navara played bishop d3, also very strong. White tried to bail out and bribe black with a pawn sack, but simple rook a2 keeps the king cut off and prepares rook to b1 check. And in fact, when white took on f6, rook check, bishop back, rook e2, and white resigned since king f1, rook d1 is mate. A very nice win for Navara, but unfortunately for him, his teammates all lost, and thus Poland defeated the Czech Republic 3-1. Our next snapshot comes from the Netherlands versus Armenia match, which Armenia won 3-1. One reason they were able to save this particular game, where black is actually 2 pawns down. But it is a queen ending, and that's the basis for black's counterplay. He starts by playing queen e4, keeping the queen centralized. White does have the 2 extra g-pawns, but with the queens on the board, they don't mean as much. White now tries king g3, but let's say he plays queen h6 check. Well, king up, and then g6, advancing the pawn. However, that leaves the queen out of play, and the king exposed to perpetual check. For example, check, 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 and well-known perpetual check. Let's say, instead of king g3, let's say white tries to exchange queens. Queen takes. Well, you exchange queens, and then you take on g5. And the point here is even though white is a pawn ahead in the king and pawn ending, with the black king in front of the pawn, this is a well-known draw. So after queen e4, centralizing the queen, white tried king to g3. But now comes queen g4 check, king f2, and white of course is hoping that after queen takes, and king takes, now by contrast to the previous position, white is completely winning. He has the opposition, and whichever way the black king goes, the white king will go the other direction. For example, king f5, king h4. And then the king will work to escort the pawn successfully up the board. This is known as the opposition. And for example, instead of king f5, let's say black tries to go this way. Then you go the opposite way. This opposition is well known to be a completely winning king and pawn endgame. However, after king f2, black now uncorks the fabulous queen to g3 check double exclamation point. The point being that if white moves back, you can now take, king f4, g3 check, king g4, and again, you play the very important king back to g5, so maintaining the opposition. If the white king goes to f3, you go to f5, white goes to h3, you go to h5. So in the game, after the fantastic queen g3 check, double exclam, king takes g3, and stalemate. Beautiful save by Grandmaster Gabriel Sargsyan against Grandmaster Jan Smits. Our final example from today's round 10 action in the World Chess Olympiad comes from the match Hungary against Denmark. Hungary, even with superstars GM Peter Lecko and Judith Polgar, has kind of been trailing back most of the event, but today seized the opportunity with a 4-0 whitewashing of the team from Denmark. And so we're going to look at their Game 4 relatively unknown Grandmaster Ferenc Berkes, 2685, against IM Jacob Glud, 2498. White's built up a fantastic position, has a rook and 2 pawns for 2 pieces. Note that with the dark squared bishop gone, white has now camped out all of his pieces on the dark squares. Again, very important. Square color concept. Also note that the 2 black minor pieces are boxed over here in the corner, not really participating in the action. White pursues his advantage with bishop h5, touching up the f7 point. Note that queen d7, rook c7 is simply lights out. So instead, black plays a5, probably hoping for something like rook a5, queen d7, and then maybe getting in either knight c6 or knight b5 with a little counterplay. However, after a5, black saw his pawn on f7 be captured. And not only does this capture the valuable f-pawn, but it also kind of shreds into the kingside here. Black now captured on b4, probably expecting white to recapture, and suddenly, bam, queen g5. What a shot. This is like a Mike Tyson fight back in the day. Wham, it is all over. It's lights out. So let's take a look. Queen g5, of course, threatens queen takes g8 mate, and threatens queen to f6. And after rook takes g5, rook c8 check, knight takes c8, rook takes c8 check, queen back, rook takes, rook back, and rook takes, we can see is checkmate. Fantastic finish. Again, what a shot. Queen to g5. Absolute fantastic finish to a 4-0 whitewash, putting Hungary back in the medal hunt. Again, I'm International Grandmaster Ron W. Henley. Thank you for joining us with OnlineChessLessons.net coverage of the 2012 World Chess Olympiad.